Hey, welcome back, Casibang's crew. We are in Unit 7. This is the second video. In this video, we're talking about special topics and motivation. So specifically, we're going to talk about hunger, sex, and social motivation. All right, so again, you don't need to write these down, but we're going to talk about hunger and we're going to talk about eating behaviors here. So there are biological, psychological, and social motivations to our eating behaviors. And we're going to talk about all of them. So a couple of them, our hypothalamus, remember back to our brain unit, monitors our appetite. We are learning restraint in our eating because our culture idolizes being thin. Our appetite hormones influence us, the sight and smell of food, the variety of food that we have access to. Stomach pangs, so again, biology, feeling of hunger. Our weight set point. Culturally learned taste preferences, okay, things that in our culture we appreciate. So maybe certain cultures that like spicy foods over other cultures. Memory of when we had our last meal. What our mood is influences how we eat. Universal, we have a universal inborn attraction to sweet and salty foods. We talked about it a little bit when we talked about the gustatory sense. And then our adaptive wariness toward novel foods. All right, so the physiology of hunger. So our hypothalamus, and we talked about the hypothalamus already. So our hypothalamus regulates hunger, thirst, and our body temperature. It helps to control our pituitary gland. It is linked to emotion in our limbic system and reward in our pleasure center. Okay, so this should all be review from our bio unit. More specifically, we're going to talk about specific parts of our hypothalamus. The first part is the lateral hypothalamus. In the lateral hypothalamus, this is where we have our feelings of hunger. This lateral hypothalamus helps produce hunger-triggering hormone orexin, which we're going to talk about in a second. And if there is an issue with the lateral hypothalamus, so there's dysfunction, it's been damaged or broken. The dysfunction of the lateral hypothalamus, LH, is our mnemonic device that we lack hunger. So if our lateral hypothalamus is damaged, then we're not going to get all these hunger triggering feelings from our stomach and from our brain, which just means we're not going to feel hungry, which as human beings, we have willpower, so we know even if we don't feel hungry, we know that we're supposed to eat. But in the animal kingdom, if they don't feel hunger, they don't eat, which means they could die and probably will die. The second part of the hypothalamus is the ventromedial hypothalamus, and this gives our feelings of fullness, okay, when we stop eating because our stomach is full. So again, if there is a dysfunction in our ventromedial hypothalamus, that means that we experience very much hungry. Okay, there is our mnemonic device for that as well. Okay, so we are constantly feeling hungry. We never want to stop eating. And again, as human beings, we have a certain amount of willpower, so we can stop ourselves from eating. We should be able to say, nope, that's enough, even though I still feel hungry. Okay, but obviously that willpower is hard. But again, in the animal kingdom, if they are feeling that very much hungry, they will eat and eat and eat and eat and eat until they literally kill themselves on overeating. All right, so here are a couple of the hormones that our body secretes that influence hunger. The first one is glucose. So glucose is sugar that circulates in our blood system. It provides energy. So when we are low in glucose, we feel hunger. And a lot of times this is why we crave sweet foods. It is broken down by insulin that is secreted from our pancreas. Insulin controls the level of fat, protein, and carbohydrates that we have in our body by reducing the levels of glucose. So these two, glucose and insulin, work together to help influence our feeling of hunger. This is a chart that is from one of your textbooks as well. So there we have insulin again, okay? So controls blood glucose. Leptin is really important. So this is secreted by our fat cells. So when we have a lot of leptin, when it's very abundant, it causes our brain to increase metabolism and decrease our hunger, our sense of hunger. So really important, leptin. Orexin, okay, secreted by our hypothalamus, and it triggers hunger. Okay, so it triggers our feeling of hunger. Ghrelin, okay, secreted by our empty stomach, saying, hey up there, I'm hungry. Okay, so it sends those I'm hungry signals to the brain. And then PYY is secreted by our digestive tract, and it sends the I'm not hungry signal to the brain. So all 5 of these hormones are really, really important in our motivation to eat, or our hunger motivation. The social aspects of hunger and eating. So we are classically conditioned to eat 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We watch cooking shows, and we go out to restaurants with these super famous chefs, and we want to see a beautiful plate of food with all different colors on it. So food is appealing, not only to our sight, but to our smell. Stress is a social aspect of hunger. Emotional eating. If you've ever had a bad day and all you want to do is eat a pint of ice cream, okay, that's emotional eating. Your culture, okay, our culture here in the United States calls for very large portions, very big meals, very hearty sort of meat and potatoes kind of meals, which is not always the most healthy eating, obviously. And then our gender, of course. We've all heard those gender comments about, women go out on dates and only eat salads, and men go out and eat the big T-bone steak. So there are gender aspects to hunger and eating as well. So eating disorders, there's a couple of things that we want to talk about here. First is our weight set point. So there is a particular weight that your body tries to maintain. Think of homeostasis. So there is a particular weight that your body tries to maintain. So sometimes it can be hard to lose weight or gain weight because of this weight set point. Then we have our basal metabolic rate, or our BMR. So this is the rate at which the body burns energy when you're just at rest. And then obesity. So this is a condition in which your body weight is 20% or more over the ideal body weight for your person's height. Okay. So about 20% or more over your ideal body weight, depending on your gender and your height. The concept of binge eating. So this is significant overeating followed by remorse or feeling of guilt. But you don't necessarily do anything about it. Okay. You're just feeling guilty about it. So a couple of eating disorders that we're going to talk about. Anorexia nervosa. So this is when a person of normal weight diets and becomes significantly underweight. So 15% or more. And that is a really important percentage that you need to remember. Okay. So for anorexia nervosa, significantly 15% or more underweight. Yet they still look in the mirror and they still think that they're fat. Okay. So they continue to starve themselves or obsess with losing more weight. Anorexia nervosa is usually diagnosed in adolescent females. Your family background can play a role in anorexia nervosa. So if you have a very competitive background or competitive siblings, very high achieving family, and very protective, almost to the point of the child cannot do anything on their own. They can't control anything in their own world. So they decide they're going to control the only thing they can, and that's their own body. Bulimia nervosa. So this is episodes of overeating, so the binge part, and it's usually super high calorie, not good for you foods like ice cream, cakes, cookies, those kind of things. Followed by a purge. So it could be vomiting, use of laxatives, fasting, or excessive exercise, where you're going to purge your body of all of those calories that you just took in. Typical binge purge eaters experience issues with anxiety and depression following the binge. Okay, so they don't feel good about themselves after they binge. And it's marked by weight fluctuations. So it's a little bit easier to hide. So you could gain 10 pounds, lose 10 pounds, and parents or really close friends or significant others may not notice the binge and purge cycle. And again, family influence. So there is a higher than usual incidence of childhood obesity and very negative self-evaluation or a very negative self-image that leads to this binge and purge cycle. Okay, possible signs of eating disorders. Okay, take a look at these. All right, so now our sexual motivation. So the psychology of sex. So we have biological influences here, psychological influences, and then socio-cultural influences. So biological influences, obviously your sexual maturity, sex hormones, especially testosterone, and your sexual orientation. Okay, this is a biological influence. Psychological influences. So exposure to stimulating conditions, sexual fantasies. And then your socio-cultural influences, your family or society values, religious or personal values, cultural expectations, social media. Okay, all these things influence your sexual motivation, particularly in adolescence. In the 1970s, researchers Masters and Johnson studied sex in a laboratory, and they recorded physiological patterns that individuals had when they were experiencing sexual encounters. So they developed this sexual response cycle. So you do need to know these 4 things in the sexual response cycle. So the excitement phase is phase 1, where our sexual motivation is building. And then we have the plateau phase, where everything just sort of levels out or evens out in our excitement. And then we have orgasm, which is sexual release. And then we have the resolution phase, which is right after the sexual release. Men experience a refractory period, which is a time period in which the excitement phase or the response cycle cannot begin again until you have a certain amount of rest. Hormones influence our sexual behavior. Hormones are necessary in the development of our sexual characteristics. So our secondary sex characteristics are initiated when our body hits puberty. So we need those hormones in our body. And they activate our sexual behavior. So estrogen is the primarily female hormone, and testosterone is the primarily male hormone. However, men have a certain level of estrogen and women have a certain level of testosterone in their bodies. So it is not all or nothing. All right, so we are going to talk about social motivation. So our needs theory, proposed by researcher McClellan, and he said that there are 3 different types of social needs that motivate us. So the first one is our need for achievement. So we want to excel. We want to be successful, so we avoid low risk as well as very high risk behaviors. We generally look for those like medium risk things where we have to work a little bit hard, but our risk of failure is pretty low. So we're willing to work hard for what we feel is genuine accomplishment. We tend to want to work by ourselves or work with only other high achievers. Low achievers will sort of mess up our need for achievement. The need for affiliation. So this is relationships, okay? Harmonious relationships with others and to feel like you belong, to feel like you have been accepted. So if you have a high need for affiliation, you tend to conform to the norms of whatever group you are trying to be a part of. And then the last one is the need for power. These are people who want personal power or they want to be able to control other people. You might need institutional power or social power, which is just being a leader in your particular workforce or in your volunteer group or some sort of social organization. And then the last one is self-determination theory. So this one says that there are 3 inborn, which means we're born with them, and universal needs that humans work to satisfy: autonomy or independence, competence, which means we're good at what we do, and relatedness, which again is belonging, okay, belonging to a group. All right, so that is it for our special topics in motivation. Remember, bring your questions in to class tomorrow. Bye-bye.